Welcome. This is our inaugural interview for Women's Rights Podcasts, and I'm interviewing the phenomenal Terry
Oh,
Heflin,
oh, who?
the award-winning historical fiction, cozy mystery author, Terry Heflin. So thank you, Terry, for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. This is awesome. This is wonderful. Really is. It is.
Well,
It's wonderful.
I appreciate you kicking things off with our interview series. So let's
Let's hope
start
I
with
don't let's hope I don't kick it to the curb.
no,
I just don't
no,
want to kick it to the curb.
no, Terry, you're fantastic. So let's start. Let's talk a little bit about your books.
Okay. Do you want me to go in any particular direction or just talk about them in general, or how specific do you want me to be?
Let's start with your first book, how that came to be, what that's about, and then the ensuing books and how those happened.
Okay, the very first book that I wrote was The Lockbox, which is the cozy mystery, and it's set in Texas, and it deals with art and a cold case, a murder case that was a real murder case, and I researched it, and it happened actually in 1928, and it was in East Texas, and it dealt with the murders of two men who were trying to infiltrate and disarm or cause disarray within the growing KKK organization at that time. And you know, in the 20s, the KKK was huge, and they were murdered. And the whole town really alibied everybody else, and so they never could bring in a conviction. They couldn't even get it in front of a grand jury because the whole thing, everybody just kept talking back and forth with each other, and just stories would change. And so it was never solved. Well, I thought this was a fantastic cold case to look at. I moved it from 1928 to 1968 into an imaginary, fictitious, central hill country Texas town. Okay. And it revolved around a family. And of course, my protagonist and a Texas Ranger solved the case, but it has never, ever been solved. And I felt good about writing about it because this happened back in 1928. So all of the participants are long gone. I wasn't going to stir up any pot. Okay. All right. There's nobody to convict because everybody's gone. All right. By now. Because it was set in the present, and they were putting the cold case with 1968. So that I moved it to 68 so that they could actually take somebody and arrest somebody who was involved, even though the original murderers are long gone.
So is it kind of a revisionist history?
Well, you not necessarily, except that my protagonist is a member of a long-standing family in this particular town that I created and invented the name of. And let me tell you, in Texas, because I live in Texas, trying to find the name of a town that is not real is tough.
It's a big state.
It's a big state, and it's got a lot of little towns, you know. And so it turned out to be my neighbor's last name. I took the last name, made the town, and just moved everything there. So if you wanted to call that revisionist, however, the murder was real, the investigation was real, how they discovered the bodies was real, all of that is factual. All of that is real that I found in my research.
That's great.
Except and then we were never able to solve it.
Mm-hmm. And then your next books are part of a series.
Right. The next books, because I love Civil War history. I'm a retired college English professor. And one of the classes that I taught was literature and history of the Civil War. And I got very caught up with the research of the Civil War, socially, culturally, uh, the the statistics, the troops, where they were. I did so much reading with it, delved into a lot of Shelby Foote's work. And if you've ever read Shelby Foote, he was amazing in his detail, and quite of other, other historians. And I worked very closely in this class. It was a team taught class with a history professor, Dr. Brian Cervantes. And we joined forces and created this class that revolved around literature and history of the Civil War. And that it really fueled my interest in the Civil War stories. And then I discovered a woman by the name of Pauline Cushman, and she was real. She was a Northern lady. She happened to be a singer and an actress. And she became a Confederate spy for the North. And so I used her story very, very loosely. As a matter of fact, after the war, she went to California, and she's buried in the Veterans Cemetery there in San Francisco. Okay, that's where she is. But very little was ever written about her. So she was sort of this very interesting character that I could take and formulate into my main character, Rebecca Beaumont O'Connell, and how she gets involved in the Civil War. But there's so much research that I went through. And I mean, I researched people, I researched food, I researched fashion. The whole thing is completely accurate for the time, even the way that I wrote the story. Because one of the things that you'll notice when you read the book, there are no contractions in the book, whether it's in speech or whether it's in the narration. And that's because contractions were not universally used. They just started to become popular in the vernacular the few years after the Civil War, but it really wasn't until after World War I that contractions came into the American vernacular.
That's so interesting.
Everything is I cannot stand historical novels that aren't historically accurate. And I was fortunate that I got a hold in the Library of Congress. I got a hold of Verena Davis, that's Jefferson Davis's wife. I got a hold of her journal, and I read her journal, and talking about food and talking about, the malaise that her husband suffered. He suffered from malaria and horrible headaches, and she suffered from a little bit of melancholia. And I mean, it was just, it was fascinating research, and it has a tendency to sometimes lead me down a rabbit hole, and I can't get out of because I go for it. But I mean, I researched weaponry. I use actual commanders' names and ranks, and I looked up uniforms, and railroads. You would have thought it would have been so easy to find railroads at that time. I spent hours going through archives of railroads, through the South and through the North, and what was going on. And so Scarlet Hem is a combination of Pauline Cushman. She was captured and sort of sentenced to hang, but she was rescued by the Union Army, who happened to come into that town at that point, and the Confederates fled, and she was rescued. They left her there because they had to get out. And the reason she was caught is she was attending a soiree with General Bragg, and she slipped the secret message into her shoe. Well, there was a little bit of it sticking up from her heel, and she was caught. For my character, it's the hem of the dress, and she slips it into the hems of her dresses, and that's how she moves, the messages, excuse me, back and forth. And I researched women spies and how they were able to go back and forth across enemy lines. And my family at that time was living in Maryland. And of course, as you know, Maryland was a border state and had, they had alliances on both sides. And I have a great uncle who worked as a Confederate spy. And so I sort of pulled things from him. He disappeared after the war. My grandmother even set out Pinkerton agents looking for him. And the last thing that we know is that he had gotten onto a wagon train. He was afraid of going home. They found that out. He was nervous because of his spy connections, and he headed west. And as far as we know, he was lost in Death Valley. We have no idea whatever happened to him.
Oh, a lot of people get lost in Death Valley.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that and Golden Circle picks up right where Scarlet Hem leaves off. I mean, right where it leaves off.
So you got Scarlet Hem, Golden
And-
Circle, the Lockbox.
And I'm working on the third in the series. It's called The Amethyst, and I'm up to chapter 19, writing chapter 19 on that.
Oh, phenomenal. Your passion for the history and how to incorporate all that into your work is incredible. So
I
well,
have
let's
names that are correct. As a matter of fact, in this one that I'm writing, just to keep going for just a minute, and then I'll let you take over. I was searching the law, the policing in Maryland in 1865, because there's a sheriff. Well, everything was politically appointed. Okay. And it takes place in Aspen Hill and Rockville, Maryland, as well as Washington City. At that point, it was city, and then it became DC. And I found the name of the jail in Rockford was on Fleet Street. So I put it on Fleet Street. I have a description of what it looked like. It was a 2-story stone building. And in my research, they happened to mention the jailer's name, and his last name was Trail. And he lived with his family over the jail. So I wrote him into the story.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
So
you touched on the fact that you're a college professor. You still are a part-time college professor, semi-retired.
Yeah.
Well, what made you catch the writing bug and say, okay, I want to be an author?
This comes from my dad. My dad, his name is Bertrand Heflin, and he was very involved in the entertainment industry and in the public relations industry in New York and in California. And the people that I've met in my life through him, through my family, sort of led me into this. And one of the things that he always wanted to do, he became a college English professor as well. He was the editor-in-chief of advertising for Collier's magazine during the 50s and 60s. And he went over after World War II and set up the Paris office of the American Express. I mean, world travel. I mean, he was amazing. And he always wanted to be able to write. Well, he had a couple of stories in mind, and he was from Texas. My family's from Texas, and he wanted to write a Texas-based story. And by the time he retired teaching, he was too ill to write, and he never fulfilled that dream. And when I retired, I wanted to, sorry, spam. I wanted to fulfill his dream. So I took a year off after retiring. I didn't start back adjunct. I took a year off and I wrote.
That's fantastic.
And my first book is dedicated to my father.
Oh, honoring your dad. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So what books influenced you? What growing up or during your writing process? What kind of literature or what kind of novels motivate you?
I think my all-time favorite book, all-time favorite, and I've read it, I can't tell you how many times, and I'll always go back to it, is To Kill a Mockingbird. Harper Lee, and I had the wonderful opportunity of meeting Harper Lee. My father was friends with Truman Capote and Nell Harper Lee, and I had the pleasure of meeting both of them. And she just always influenced me. The first time I picked up that book, I was just glued to it, and it was the way that she told the story. It was that personal connection that she made with her characters, with the setting, with the conflict, with the social situations that she made. And that book, I think, has influenced me more than anything. I read a wonderful book by it's called The Historian, and it's a combination fantasy, vampire tale, historical travel. It's just, and you don't know where the history ends and the fiction starts. And I also loved Elizabeth Peters and her Amelia Peabody, and she was an Egyptologist herself. And so when she was writing these books, you didn't know where the history ended and where fiction was Amelia Peabody a real person? And you finish up with the historian and you go, was there really a vampire named Jackie? I mean, you just don't know. And that's the wonderful thing. I don't want to know. I don't want to know that something wasn't real or something was right. And so they really influenced me so much on just telling a really, really good story and putting the readers there and being accurate. Every single one of these people was absolutely accurate in what they talked about.
Yeah,
and that's what I wanted to emulate.
That's true. So what are the challenges that you've had to overcome in your writing? It really also in your professional career. I mean, this is a women's rights publishing and author services interview. So, maybe from a female perspective, what challenges have you had to overcome?
Well, the first time is because I really wanted to write several years ago, but teaching full time, there's just no way. I just didn't have time. It was the time frame. And, when I like to sit down and write, I'll go for like 3 or 4 hours, and write. Well, when you're teaching full time, you don't have that. And so you'd have to break it up. It's very hard to time manage. And so I put a lot of the ideas off. Scarlet Ham was an idea that I put off for quite some time. I knew I wanted to write it, but was I going to have the time to devote to it? I think one of the challenges is I think women are sometimes locked, and we talked about this just a little bit, that women are kind of locked into this, oh, well, if you're going to be a woman and you're going to write fluff and you're going to write romance, and there's nothing wrong with romance, please don't get me wrong. But that's all you're going to do. You're not going to delve into a serious topic. Or if it's a serious topic, it only pertains to women, but women they're so eclectic. Just because it might be a woman's situation doesn't mean that, a man is not going to discover the same situations, or transgendered or gay or lesbian. It's relationships. Everything is a love story. Every piece of literature is a love story. And by that, what I mean is it's relationships. And it's
That's great.
characters.
I love that. That's a great saying. Every piece of literature is a love story.
Somebody told that to me, and I can't remember who it is. But I didn't pick that up. Somebody told that to me, and I went, oh my God, that's right. It's true. It's true. Every short story, every poem, everything, whether it's dark, whether it's about relationships, whether it's your own relationship or a relationship with someone else or something that you're going through, every writing is a love story, because it's about relationships and characters. And
I really like that. Now you have a publisher. So tell me how that came about, your publishing deal.
That was funny. That was really funny. I am involved. One of my pastimes is Western preservation, Western history. I am an administrator for the westernschannel.com. I've worked with marvelous people, people that I've met, Alex Cord and Bob Fuller and Ken Farmer and quite a few other people, that I've met through. I mean, I met Johnny Crawford, and unfortunately we lost him a few days ago. But he was wonderful. He and his wife Charlotte, I spent quite a bit of time with them. They were just amazing. And Darby Hinton and so many people that I grew up watching television with, and going to the Cowboy Way Jubilee this year. It's being held in San Angelo, Texas, and meeting so many different people and their preservation, Bob and Johnny Terry, and their preservation of the Western, Western film, Western literature, Western television, all of those things. And I've had such a phenomenal experience meeting all the people like Barry Corbin, and there's others, that I could mention, but and just being able to do that. And so I happened to be at the Cowboy Way Jubilee, and I was working, as a matter of fact, with Alex Cord. And it was so funny because my cousin Van Heflin worked with Alex Cord in the 1966 remake of Stagecoach.
The actor
And so
Van Heflin. Yeah.
yeah. So it was like, okay, the Heflin and Cord connection is back together again, for a few days. It was so much fun. And I have a picture of him. He happens to be right over there. Anyway, and he just celebrated a birthday yesterday. He's 88. And so I was working with him, and right next door where we were was Ken Farmer and Buck Stanky. And then T.C. Miller, who's also a writer, was right behind us. And Darby Hinton was on the other side. So we were sort of in actors, authors row, okay? And at this point, I wasn't published. I had my first draft manuscript ready, and I got to talking to Ken Farmer. And Ken and Buck, when they began writing, and Ken's got over 40 books now, I think.
He's prolific.
He's very prolific. He began a publishing company, and he represents other people. And it's called Timber Creek Publishing. And he and I got to talking in a bar at the hotel. All right. Because we were all staying at the same place. And we got to talking about my book, and he said, well, send it to me. Let's see what we can do. And so he sort of became my primary editor and has really been a mentor in bringing me down this road. And what started him into publishing is he, if I get the story straight, and he'll correct me, I know if I'm wrong, he had a book that was accepted in traditional publishing. And it was going to take over a year to actually get out. And he said, well, this is ridiculous. So he began this independent publishing company called Timber Creek Press. And it's been phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal.
So the bottom line is, there are a lot of writers, no matter what their gender, that would love to have a publishing deal.
Right.
And, they send out their log lines, and they send out
and their queries.
Right. But networking. So your advice is networking. Get yourself out there. I got my publishing deal through a Facebook group.
Yeah. Get yourself out there. Get yourself known. I mean, I'm not saying don't self-publish. I like being with a publisher. It's amazing how that just expands. Okay, everything. I'm not a great marketer, as you know. I have difficulty in marketing. There's certain things that I'm beginning to know a little bit more about, because my primary love is writing, and marketing. But even in traditional publishing, you still have to market. You still have to do things. It's not like, well, they just do it all. They don't do that anymore.
Unless you're with Penguin or Barnes and some giant publisher where just their brand itself sells your book.
Right. Just
or you have or the writer has such a big brand name, John Grisham.
Or, Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or something like that. And to be absolutely honest, unless they can almost guarantee that you're going to sell $20,000 and that they're going to get their advance back, you're not going to get
There's no
it.
advance, right?
There's no advance, okay? Right. I mean, you have to pay back what you don't sell, and there's lots of things, I'm not saying traditional publishing isn't a good way to go. You've got to try different things and then find what works for you.
Right. So
I want a small independent publisher. I think you get so much more service. You get involved with it. It's not just, okay, you're going to send this to this big publishing house and this editor's going to come in, and sometimes you get the dailies back, the proof back, and you go, did I write this or did the editor write this? And with an independent publisher, you don't get that. They work with you and so you don't lose your voice.
Right.
So many times a big publishing house editor comes in and you've lost your voice.
Right.
That's not you.
We could talk forever. I love talking with you, Terry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're just a wealth of information, but we are coming to the end of our
Okay.
interview. So any just parting words of wisdom to an up and coming writer, female or any other writer?
Tell a good story. Get it down on the page. Put the lightning on the page, as the quote says. Just let it speak for itself. Don't overthink. I have a tendency to overthink sometimes and overwrite, which my editor will tell you about. Get some beta readers. Beta readers are so important. You may want to have a reader who loves everything that you do, and then you want a reader that's going to give you the blue pencil, okay, and tell you the truth. And don't be afraid of the truth. And work with it. Work with it.
That's great.
I just there's so many opportunities for very strong, feminine, female. Don't lose that femininity in the protagonist. You don't have to make them masculine. Keep that femininity, because there's so much strength in women characters being women.
That's great. So thank you, Terry Heflin. We're going to put links to all of your works and underneath this interview. Anybody that, if you like these podcasts, if you like the interviews, please subscribe to our Patreon account. So that's going to help women's rights publishing and author services. So again, thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I'd love to come back. This is great.
That would be awesome.
Thank you so much, Ted.
Thank you. All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.